Today's main characters are a mother and daughter, Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. They once appeared inseparable, sharing a life seemingly full of love and care. But behind that facade was a carefully fabricated lie, a shocking crime that unfolded in 2015 and shook the entire United States. It seemed like something straight out of a dramatic movie, yet it happened in real life with twists and turns no one could have imagined. So what really happened between the two of them? To understand it better, we need to delve into the haunting details of this case. Dee Dee Blanchard was born in 1967 into an ordinary family in Louisiana, USA. From a young age, those around her noticed she had a certain sharpness, even intelligence, with rumors swirling that Dee Dee had the ability to manipulate people to get what she wanted. After finishing high school, Dee Dee trained and became a nurse's aide. It was during this time that she met Rod Blanchard, a young man 7 years her junior, and they began a relationship. When Dee Dee was 24, she became pregnant and gave birth to their daughter, Gypsy Rose. At the time, Rod was only 17 and decided to marry Dee Dee so they could raise the child together. However, they quickly separated when Rod realized that fatherhood was more than he could handle. Gypsy Rose was born on July 27, 1991, in Golden Meadow, Louisiana. Although divorced, Dee Dee and Rod stayed in contact to discuss how to raise their daughter. Dee Dee's life as a single mother was far from easy, marked by constant financial struggles. Even more heartbreaking was that her little daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, was not as fortunate or healthy as other children. From a young age, Gypsy suffered from countless serious illnesses: muscular dystrophy, asthma, epilepsy, and severe digestive issues. She even had to use a wheelchair due to muscle atrophy, and her vision, hearing, and many other bodily functions were significantly impaired. Every day of Gypsy's life was spent under close monitoring with medications and medical equipment. She had an oxygen tube taped to her nose, tubes in her ears to prevent infections, and her teeth gradually decayed from continuous use of high-dose antibiotics. Yet despite all of that, she remained cheerful and optimistic. Gypsy's heartbreaking story quickly drew the attention of the public and deeply moved many people. Some even criticized Rod Blanchard for being an irresponsible father who abandoned his family to struggle on their own. Because of this, many charitable organizations and individual donors stepped forward, embracing the spirit of compassion and solidarity. They launched donation drives to help improve the lives of Gypsy and her mother. One notable example was the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which generously covered all expenses for Gypsy to meet her idol, including country singer Miranda Lambert. They also sponsored free trips to Disney World so she could experience the joy every child should have a chance to feel. Not only that, the mother and daughter were also given a new, fully equipped house to ensure Gypsy had the most comfortable living environment. They no longer had to stay at the Ronald McDonald House, a place for families with seriously ill children. People didn't just help financially. They also supported them emotionally, from regularly driving Dee Dee and Gypsy to the airport for out-of-state treatments, to helping with errands like shopping for essentials and spending time visiting and comforting the two of them. Gypsy didn't attend school and was homeschooled by her mother. According to Dee Dee, her daughter's intelligence was impaired due to brain damage, which prevented her from developing like a normal person. Even after reaching her teenage years, Gypsy still had a high-pitched voice and spoke in a whiny, childish manner. Gypsy didn't have friends her own age and had little exposure to the outside world. But in return, she had her mother by her side, worrying about every meal, every night's sleep, and selflessly sacrificing everything so Gypsy could live longer, even if just one more day. Perhaps that sacred mother-daughter bond was what touched those around them the most. However, all the admiration the community had for the Blanchard mother and daughter suddenly crumbled on June 14, 2015, when a strange and somewhat vulgar post appeared on Dee Dee and Gypsy's shared Facebook account. "That bitch is dead." Everyone was stunned. At first, many believed it was a sick joke or that someone had hacked the account. But before they could calm themselves, another comment appeared from the same account. Far more terrifying. "I fucking slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so fucking loud." Those brutal words terrified the neighbors and everyone who had known the mother and daughter so much that no one dared to check what had happened inside the house. Eventually, they decided to make an emergency call to the police to report a potentially horrific attack. But when police arrived, everything was quiet. There were no signs of forced entry. Yet something strange caught their attention. Gypsy's special wheelchair was still sitting outside. If that was the case, how could she have gone anywhere? Could someone have kidnapped her? The authorities didn't hesitate another second. They broke in and began searching every corner of the house. Within minutes, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene that sent chills down their spines. Dee Dee's body lay slumped on the bed, covered in stab wounds. The room reeked of death, indicating she had been dead for several days. But the most terrifying part was, Gypsy was nowhere to be found. She wasn't in her medical bed, nor was she in her wheelchair. There were no signs of struggle, no indication she had been dragged away in panic. The bizarre and puzzling scene led police to several theories. Perhaps someone had broken into the house to murder Dee Dee and kidnap Gypsy? Or maybe it was some deranged person from the internet, obsessed with the mother-daughter story, who decided to rescue them. Police searched the house from top to bottom for clues, but came up empty-handed. At that point, the only lead they had was to trace the IP address of the disturbing Facebook post. Following that trail, authorities identified a suspicious location. A small house in Wisconsin belonging to a man named Nicholas Gojon. Police immediately raided the house and were stunned at what they saw. Gypsy wasn't huddled in a corner like a kidnapped victim, nor did she look scared or abused. On the contrary, she was happily dancing with Nicholas, needing no assistance, with no medical equipment in sight. What was really going on? That moment left everyone who witnessed it in complete shock, an unprecedented blow. Everything they had believed and sympathized with suddenly turned into an inexplicable mess. Questions piled up one after another, so overwhelming that no one could organize their thoughts. But then, the truth was revealed, and it was more terrifying than any theory. The truth was that Gypsy was never sick. She never had cancer or muscular dystrophy, nor did she suffer from brain damage or any of the other conditions her mother had claimed. She was completely healthy, able to walk, eat on her own without feeding tubes, and could have lived a normal life, if only she hadn't been trapped in the invisible cage Dee Dee had created. So was the one who was truly sick not Gypsy, but her own mother? Had Dee Dee been lying for decades? Yes, you heard that right. That's exactly what the police uncovered in their investigation. Dee Dee suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder in which a caregiver, typically a parent, intentionally causes or fabricates illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy, and she forced her daughter to play the role of a patient, trapping her in a cycle of medications, doctors, and pity. That terrifying psychological manipulation made Gypsy believe it all. She accepted wearing children's clothes, shaving her head to look like a cancer patient. Beyond that, she genuinely believed she couldn't walk, that she needed medication to survive, because her mother always gave her pills. Without them, she thought she would die. Gypsy was never allowed to grow up or think for herself. She didn't even know her real age. Only after being arrested in 2015 did she find out she was 23, not 19 as Dee Dee had told her. One might think Dee Dee's lies stopped at hospital visits, medication, wheelchairs, and shaved heads. But to make the act even more convincing, she forced Gypsy to use a feeding tube. Even though her digestive system was perfectly normal, installing and replacing feeding tubes is far from painless. It's a physically traumatic procedure, and Gypsy endured it over and over again, with no valid reason whatsoever. Anyone who has ever had a tube inserted into their stomach without anesthesia can understand just how cruel Dee Dee's actions were toward her daughter. It wasn't just deception, it was physical abuse. Even more astonishing was how sophisticated Dee was in covering up the truth. She didn't just deceive her daughter, she fooled the entire medical system, charities, friends, neighbors, and even government officials. But the question remains, how did Dee get away with it all without anyone catching on? It sounds far-fetched, but Dee Dee was actually more clever than most realized. She had once worked as a nurse's aide, giving her deep understanding of medical terminology and the healthcare system's inner workings. Whenever a doctor raised doubts about Gypsy's condition, Dee could immediately provide convincing answers, referencing medical records and health histories no one could verify. This allowed her to silence all suspicion from the outset. And if someone tried to dig deeper, Dee would quickly move, taking Gypsy to another hospital, another city, where no one knew their past. This is how she kept up her elaborate lie for decades without detection. Even when Gypsy's birth certificate and medical records were lost during Hurricane Katrina, Dee Dee used that as an excuse to further conceal her daughter's real age. She even deliberately got rid of Gypsy's identification documents so the girl couldn't verify anything. It wasn't just the healthcare system that was deceived. Even Gypsy's biological father, Rod Blanchard, became one of Dee Dee's victims. Contrary to what Dee Dee told others, he was not an irresponsible father. He tried to stay in touch with Gypsy, sent monthly child support, bought her gifts, and even spoke to her by phone. But Dee Dee constantly blocked him, giving excuses to prevent him from seeing his daughter. She claimed Gypsy was too weak to travel and that the outside environment would worsen her fragile condition. In reality, Dee Dee knew that if Rod spent enough time with his daughter, he'd see the truth, that Gypsy wasn't as frail as she claimed. So she cut off all contact and built a wall between them, keeping her daughter trapped in the imaginary world she had created. However, police discovered that Dee Dee's strange behavior didn't just begin after her marriage to Rob. Her past was far from clean. No one in Dee Dee's family liked her. In fact, they showed disgust and contempt whenever her name came up. And that wasn't without reason. She had a criminal record, had been wanted for writing bad checks, and had even once poisoned someone's food. But karma struck back. The very poison she used ended up making her sick, leaving her bedridden for 9 months, unable to stand. Perhaps it was fate's way of punishing a cruel person. Yet even when physically weakened, she never stopped manipulating those around her mentally. It didn't stop there. While caring for her elderly mother, Dee Dee constantly complained and even left her to cry out in hunger, filth, and exhaustion until the woman finally passed away. You'd think such an experience might make Dee Dee feel remorse. But even after her mother died, she didn't grieve. She felt relieved, as though she had shed a toxic burden. Worse still, she didn't want to keep her mother's ashes. She even suggested flushing them down the toilet. All of this paints a chilling picture of Dee Dee, not just as a fraud, someone abandoned by her own family, but as an ungrateful, heartless, cruel child who treated even her own mother like she was nothing. Could someone like that ever be a good mother? The answer is obviously no. But the terrifying thing is, Dee Dee made the whole world believe she was the perfect one. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. By the time Gypsy turned 21, she had begun to see through her mother's lies. How did she realize the truth? Did she hire a detective? Did someone tell her? No. It was all thanks to a bug. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? But one sunny day, Gypsy was reading when a bug flew in, startling her. On instinct, she jumped out of her wheelchair and realized she wasn't paralyzed. That moment sparked a storm of doubts in her mind. She began piecing things together. Suddenly, she looked at the book she was reading and was stunned. It was a life skills guide she had once taken from her mother's room out of curiosity. And yet, she could read and understand every word, contrary to what Dee Dee had always claimed about her being mentally impaired. However, when she expressed her suspicions about those strange things to her mother, Dee Dee immediately dismissed them, insisting they were just hallucinations. But those words couldn't silence the thoughts in Gypsy's mind. In the days that followed, whenever her mother wasn't home, Gypsy quietly stood up, walked, and did the things she had always longed to do. She bounced on trampolines, played in the snow, even danced with joy, as if she were gradually freeing herself from the invisible chains that had bound her for so long. She also began resisting her mother by refusing to take medication or go to the hospital. But Dee Dee had no hesitation in hitting her daughter if she showed any sign of defiance. She had even once threatened to hit her with a hammer and drugged her to the point where Gypsy could no longer respond to reality. Did that abuse push Gypsy to act out in rage against her mother? Or was there a more carefully crafted plan behind it all? So what exactly did Gypsy do on that fateful night? Stay tuned to discover the gripping developments that followed. From the moment police found her and Nicholas and brought them in for questioning, Gypsy knew the game was over. But she wasn't ready to admit the truth. She kept up the act of confusion, as if she were merely an unfortunate victim caught in a tragedy.
All these things and no one said anything. No one said anything. And I know I keep bringing this up, but all the medication she was on. I mean, that's almost the worst part about this for me, is that she was drugged by her mother.
At that same moment, tension was rising in Nick's interrogation room.
I know. Okay.
Hey, the only reason I did it is because I did it for me and her. That's the real reason I did it. I would have never did it if it was not for me and her.
Okay.
At first, he denied many things. But when police presented the blood-stained knife and envelope, Nick's expression changed. He became visibly unsettled. He knew there was no way out. That's when he admitted it. Gypsy had asked him to do it. Nicholas panicked when he saw the envelope because investigators, through text message records, suspicious packages, and a thorough search of his home, had discovered that he had mailed the blood-covered knife to his parents' house. A reckless and naive move. Nicholas believed that this simple trick would fool investigators, but the truth was the opposite. Every trace he left behind only tightened the noose around him. But Nicholas wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He had autism, specifically Asperger's syndrome. People with this condition often fixate intensely on a person, an idea, or a belief, and struggle to let go. To Nicholas, Gypsy was the center of his world. She was the only person who treated him like he was normal, the only one who made him feel like he mattered. And for her, he was willing to do anything, even kill. Back in Gypsy's interrogation room, the police looked at her with scrutiny and told her that Nicholas had confessed everything. That moment shattered her. She froze, feeling as though everything had crumbled. There was no way left to protect herself. She began to tell the whole truth. Growing up under Dee Dee's suffocating control, Gypsy had lived in a small, isolated world, cut off from any social connection, stripped of personal joy, and denied even the simplest emotions a young girl should be allowed to feel. She wasn't allowed to have friends, and love was strictly forbidden. So Gypsy turned to the internet, where she could finally be herself, free from the fake wheelchair, free from false illness, no longer the fragile little girl. And it was there that she met Nicholas Godejohn. At first, their meeting was just a harmless way to pass the time. But only 4 days after their first conversation, they dove into a passionate relationship. To Gypsy, Nicholas wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the one savior who could pull her out of the darkness of her life. Day after day, for nearly 2 years, they role-played over the phone, imagining a world where they could be free from judgment. The photos Gypsy sent to Nicholas grew bolder and more provocative. She wore revealing cosplay outfits, posed with knives, trying to prove she was willing to do anything Nicholas desired. But none of those virtual fantasies could mask the harsh reality Gypsy faced every day. She knew begging or crying to her mother would never work, so she set a goal: escape Dee Dee at all costs. So she and Nicholas began to craft a plan. At first, it was just a joke. Plan B mentioned in messages, imagining a future without Dee Dee, where they could run away and build a life together. But the idea grew clearer, more real, more within reach. And one day, Gypsy became convinced that killing Dee Dee was the only way she could ever be free. On that fateful night, Gypsy continued to play her role, an obedient daughter sitting beside her mother on their familiar bed, painting nails and chatting cheerfully. It was a false peace that only Gypsy knew was about to be shattered completely. As the night deepened and Dee Dee fell into a deep sleep, Gypsy began to carry out the cruel plan she had been harboring. She quietly got out of bed, each step as soft as a whisper, her trembling hands slowly opening the door for Nicholas to sneak inside. In the dim shadows, Nicholas held a cold, sharp knife and walked directly toward Dee Dee's room without hesitation. Perhaps Gypsy couldn't bear to witness what was about to happen, because as Nicholas prepared to act, she ran into the bathroom, covered her ears, and curled up in a corner, trying to detach herself from reality. And then, within seconds, Dee Dee's screams tore through the silence, horrifying sounds that Gypsy had never heard before. She knew exactly what was happening, but she did nothing. Once everything fell silent, she walked into her mother's room, stepped over the blood of the woman who had raised her without fear or remorse, opened the drawer, took some cash and papers, and left with Nicholas, relieved, freed, but also deeply shaken. After hearing that chilling confession, the officers sitting across from her couldn't hide the shock on their faces. Some exchanged instinctive glances, trying to process what they had just heard. After all, they had believed Gypsy was just a fragile girl swept up in a murder committed by her boyfriend. That revelation proved that even though Gypsy didn't physically kill her mother, she had played the role of the mastermind. Her life would begin anew, not in the vast world outside, but behind bars, in a prison shaped by her own choices. Finally, Gypsy's trial took place in July 2016. Her defense attorneys focused on the Munchausen by proxy syndrome that Dee Dee had inflicted on her for years. They laid bare everything Gypsy had endured, using it as mitigating evidence to lessen her sentence. When the truth came to light, the public no longer saw her solely as a criminal, but also as a tragic victim. This shift in perception spared her the death penalty, which some initially believed she might face. In the end, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a compromise between justice and compassion. Gypsy later shared thoughts that touched many. She said that life in prison, though difficult, was still better than the years she spent living with her mother. There, at least, she had the right to make her own decisions, however small, to interact with real people and to work, instead of just existing in a web of constant lies. Gypsy knew she had committed a crime, but she also believed that if she hadn't, she might never have lived a real life. It was a trade-off she felt she had no choice but to make. Outside, Gypsy's biological father and his new wife regularly visited her. They had never had the chance to be close to her during the years Dee Dee manipulated everything, but now they were doing their best to make up for lost time. Nicholas wasn't as fortunate as Gypsy. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder. He was also given an additional 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, served concurrently with the life sentence, meaning he will spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of release. That sentence was handed down in 2019 after a jury concluded that despite his autism and certain mental health issues, Nicholas was fully aware of his actions when he killed Dee Dee Blanchard. After everything, Gypsy was finally granted parole and given a chance at a new life in December 2023. Though the wounds of her past remain, and the road ahead is sure to be difficult, at the very least, she now has what she longed for all those years: true freedom. This is perhaps one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever come across. Not just because of the shock it caused, but because of the deeply complex ethical and psychological questions hidden within. Looking back at everything that happened, I can't help but feel a quiet, lingering sense of unease. This is not merely a story about a crime. It's a warning about the devastating power of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. Sometimes violence doesn't leave visible wounds. It hides in control, in fear injected day after day until the victim believes there's no choice left but to obey. That's why society must pay attention and speak out loudly when suspicious signs appear, instead of accepting the surface of a carefully crafted narrative. And maybe, just maybe, if someone had acted sooner, Gypsy wouldn't have had to carry such a cruel fate on her shoulders.